really disturbing images coming out of Israel over the past couple of days. And of course, this has been part of an ongoing series of disturbing images for decades now. And at various points, there are flashpoints that rise above the fray. We have seen the Israeli government begin evictions of Palestinians living in East Jerusalem.
Living there for decades because of the peace treaty that Israel is now violating.
Well, I mean, they've been living there for decades upon decades. I'm just trying to come up with a reason why we have those evictions other than to say this is basically part of an ethnic cleansing project in Jerusalem, and that has essentially started a new round of protests that were taking place on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Israeli government stormed the mosque. And then we saw rockets being launched from Hamas, I should say from Gaza, by Hamas.
Yeah, I just want to make that super clear, though, just because there were the evictions in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Netanyahu wasn't effectively able to get the Palestinians to retaliate in a sufficient way because he wants that retaliation so he can build his coalition government. So then they storm the third holiest site for Palestinians in Jerusalem. They brutalize people. Hamas retaliates. And then what do you know? Israel retaliates hundreds more fold, kills children, kills dozens of Palestinians. And here we are. And, the consensus in Washington is it's the Palestinians' fault.
Well, yes. And here is... we should say that in those air raids, there were rockets sent, like I was saying, by Hamas, 90% of which were stopped by their Iron Dome defense system. I think there were 6 maybe Israelis who were injured. The retaliation led to the deaths of 25 Palestinians, 9 of whom were children, 126 injured. And here is... the State Department spokesman, Ned Price, asking questions from U.S. reporters. And it's quite clear that the Biden administration does not seem to be prepared for this whatsoever. And to the extent that they are prepared, it is really they're prepared to do nothing. Here is Ned Price's response to reporters.
We're speaking of the principle of self-defense.
I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory, the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would hesitate to comment on operations beyond, the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate to speak to specific operations that have just occurred. But the broader principle of self-defense is something we stand by on behalf of Israel and every other country.
Do you think that an Israeli military response to the rockets coming in, a military response to the rockets coming in is covered by this broader rubric of self-defense, right?
Self-defense often does authorize the use of force.
Thank you, Matt. I want to ask you about East Jerusalem, but let's talk about what you said about the principle of self-defense. Does that in any way apply to the Palestinians? Do they have a right to self-defense? Do Palestinians have a right to self-defense?
In broadly speaking, Saeed, we believe in the concept of self-defense. We believe it applies to any state. I don't think that I certainly wouldn't want my words to be construed as.
I understand. I want to ask you. I don't want to harp on this either, but the Israelis killed 13 people just now, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn the killing of children?
Saeed,
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging. Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinians, are something we would take very seriously.
Okay.
You're going to know as soon as I read what your answer was that there's a big problem with it. You said, well, not a problem, it just doesn't answer the question. We believe that it, meaning the right to self-defense, applies to any state. Well, you see the problem, right? Yes?
Do you want to?
Do you regard Palestine as a state?
I wasn't
Do you
referring.
think that, you don't in the context of the ICC and the UN. So are you saying that you do not, if it applies to any state, are you saying that Palestinians don't have a right to self-defense?
I was making a broader point, not attached to Israel or the Palestinians in that case.
So they do have a right to self-defense.
Matt, I'm not in a position to debate the legalities from up here. What our message is one of de-escalation.
All right.
From one side, he doesn't mind commenting on the rocket attacks from the ones after they were spurned into responding, because this is exactly what Netanyahu wants. He's fine with commenting just on the response from Palestine.
Well, I mean, this is the problem with the position of the U.S. government. It's untenable, and at one point something's got to give. And we shall see. And this pressure may end up coming ultimately from Congress. But I think it's going to take a while, frankly, before U.S. politicians catch up to where really the vast majority of Americans are, where we should not be funding to the tune of $3.8 billion the air attacks on civilians. I mean, we shouldn't be doing it, and it's quite clear that the way that the Israelis have been handling the situation is not going to it's not going to change. They're just going to continue to dispossess Palestinians and continue to build settlements and until we just in this ongoing fashion.
But I mean, we fund them, and that yet they hold us hostage. I mean, the brazenness of this, I the way, you know, Ned Price, right, last name, the way he squirmed there. I mean, that shows the absolute weakness and cowardice of the Biden administration's foreign policy, the lack of imagination, and clearly the lack of gumption. It's gross to me.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and we will be back with Nora Erekhart.